Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe, a podcast created for people around the world who want to improve their English skills while also developing a deeper and calmer understanding of global topics. Because we truly believe that learning English becomes more meaningful when it is connected to real-world ideas, thoughtful discussion, and clear explanations that help listeners not only hear the language, but also think in English at the same time, without stress, without speed, and without the feeling that global issues are too complex to understand.
We are very happy that you are listening today, and this episode is designed especially for English learners who enjoy listening slowly, carefully, and thoughtfully. Because our goal is not to overwhelm you with difficult words or fast speech, but to guide you through ideas step by step so you can follow the meaning. Notice how sentences are built, and feel more confident listening to long discussions in English about the world we all share.
Today's topic is called China, Taiwan, and the World, What's Really at Stake? And this topic is important not because it is about conflict or fear, but because it helps us understand how different parts of the world are connected through trade, technology, communication, and shared responsibility. And when we understand these connections, we can better understand why events in one region can influence daily life, jobs, education, and opportunities in many other countries, even for people who live very far away.
This topic also matters for English learners because international topics like this appear very often in global news, academic discussions, and professional conversations. And by listening to this podcast, you are not only learning about the world, but also learning how English is used to explain complex ideas in a clear, neutral, and respectful way, which is an important skill for students, workers, and anyone who wants to communicate confidently with people from different backgrounds.
Throughout this episode, we will focus on understanding rather than judging, and on learning rather than arguing, because our purpose is educational and language-focused, and we want you to feel comfortable listening even if this topic is new to you, knowing that every explanation is meant to help you improve your listening skills while gaining a broader view of how global relationships shape the modern world.
Before we continue, we kindly ask you to support the English Globe by liking this video and subscribing to the YouTube channel, because your support helps us continue creating free educational content for English learners around the world, and it also helps this podcast reach more listeners who want to learn English through meaningful and thoughtful global discussions.
We would also love to hear from you in the comments, so please tell us where you are listening from, whether you are listening at home, at work, or while traveling. And feel free to share your thoughts or opinions about today's topic in a respectful and thoughtful way. Because this podcast is not only about listening, but also about creating a global learning community where ideas, perspectives, and language come together.
Now that we have introduced today's topic and welcomed you into our global classroom, let us move forward together with open minds, calm thinking, and a shared interest in learning English through understanding the world, as we begin exploring how China, Taiwan, and the wider international community are connected in ways that influence far more than we might first imagine.
When we talk about China's global role, it is important to understand that China is one of the largest players in the world economy, and this is not only because of its population or land size, but mainly because it has developed extensive systems for manufacturing, trade, and technological production that allow it to supply goods to almost every continent. Many of the products people use daily, including electronics, clothing, machinery, and household items, are either made in China or depend on materials and components that come from China, which shows how interconnected the world has become in terms of production and trade, and why understanding China's role is important for anyone who wants to follow global trends or study international relations.
To explain this more clearly, think of China as a central hub in a very large network of countries, where raw materials come from Africa, parts are assembled in Asia, and the finished products are shipped to Europe, the Americas, and other regions. This system of global trade allows countries to specialize in certain activities while relying on each other for goods and services. For example, a smartphone might have a screen made in South Korea, a microchip produced in Taiwan, and assembly done in China before it is sold in many countries. Understanding this network helps English learners see how international relationships affect the products they use every day and why China's economic position matters globally.
China's influence is not only about producing goods, it is also about the scale of its economy. With over 1.4 billion people, a large workforce, and significant investment in infrastructure like ports, railways, and factories, China can manage production at a scale that few other countries can match. This scale allows Chinese companies to offer competitive prices for international markets and to participate in long-term projects that involve multiple countries. For English learners, it is useful to note how words like scale, network, infrastructure, and supply chain appear in discussions about global trade, because these terms are often used in newspapers, podcasts, and reports about economics and international affairs.
To make it easier to understand, you can imagine China as a very large engine in the global economy. When the engine works smoothly, it helps goods, services, and money move across the world. When there are delays or problems in China, such as factory shutdowns or transport interruptions, these can affect many other countries, even those far away. This shows that global trade is like a chain where one part influences the entire system. By listening carefully to these explanations, learners can connect English vocabulary to real-world examples, which helps them remember both the language and the meaning behind the words.
Another important aspect is China's interaction with other regions, including Asia, Europe, and Africa. China participates in many trade agreements, investment projects, and technology partnerships. For instance, it exports machinery to Europe, invests in energy projects in Africa, and engages in high-tech collaboration with neighboring Asian countries. These interactions are complex, but for English learners, the key idea is that countries do not act alone. They rely on cooperation, negotiation, and communication to achieve economic growth and stability. Understanding this can help learners use English in conversations about business, international studies, and global issues.
It is also helpful to notice the numbers involved when discussing China's global role. China's exports total billions of dollars every year. It has millions of workers in factories, and it trades with nearly every country in the world. Using numbers in English, such as millions, billions, percentage, or growth rate, allows learners to describe scale and importance accurately. For example, saying China exports more than $2 billion of goods to Europe every year combines vocabulary, numbers, and sentence structure that are useful for professional and educational contexts. Adam and I will continue to give these examples throughout the podcast, so listeners can practice both language and understanding.
Finally, it is important to remember that learning about China's role in the world is not about politics or judgment. It is about understanding the facts. China produces a lot, trades with many countries, and influences global supply chains and technology. By focusing on these neutral and factual points, English learners can safely expand their vocabulary, improve comprehension, and feel confident discussing global topics without needing to take sides or worry about sensitive issues. This approach is useful for students, workers, and anyone interested in world affairs and learning English at the same time.
In summary, China's global role can be understood through its manufacturing, trade networks, economic scale, and international interactions. By listening carefully to how Adam explains these ideas and how I rephrase them in simpler terms, learners can improve vocabulary, notice sentence patterns, and connect abstract concepts to real-world examples. Understanding China in this way not only builds knowledge about the world, but also strengthens English skills, because learners see how descriptive language, comparisons, and factual explanations work together to communicate complex ideas clearly and effectively.
When we look at Taiwan, it is important to understand that although Taiwan is smaller in size and population compared to countries like China or the United States, it plays a very significant role in the global economy, especially in technology and innovation. Many of the electronic devices, computer components, and advanced semiconductors used around the world are produced in Taiwan. This shows that even a small region can have a large influence on global industries, because modern production and technology depend on specialized expertise that Taiwan has developed over many decades.
To make it easier to understand, think of Taiwan as a hub for technology and innovation. Companies in Taiwan manufacture microchips, computer processors, and electronic components that are used in phones, laptops, cars, and other devices everywhere. These products are essential parts of global supply chains, which means that many countries depend on Taiwan to keep industries running smoothly. By understanding this, English learners can connect vocabulary like innovation, technology, and supply chain to practical examples they see every day in their own lives.
Taiwan's role in global supply chains is also a key factor in its importance. A supply chain is a network of producers, suppliers, and distributors that work together to make and deliver products. For instance, a smartphone might use a screen from South Korea, a battery from Japan, and a microchip from Taiwan before being assembled in another country. This shows how countries and regions cooperate to produce goods efficiently. Learning about supply chains in English helps students practice vocabulary related to business, trade, and logistics, as well as descriptive language to explain processes step by step.
Even though Taiwan is a small region geographically, it has a global impact because of its technological expertise and innovative companies. Small areas can influence large systems when they specialize in important skills or resources. For example, the world relies on Taiwan for high-quality semiconductors, which are essential in computers, smartphones, cars, and even medical equipment. By listening to this explanation, learners can see how language, facts, and real-world examples work together, which strengthens comprehension and builds vocabulary for academic and professional purposes.
Taiwan also participates in international partnerships in a neutral and educational sense. These partnerships are not about politics, but about cooperation in trade, research, and technology. For example, Taiwan collaborates with countries in Asia, Europe, and the Americas to produce advanced electronics and participate in global innovation projects. This type of cooperation shows English learners how neutral vocabulary like partnership, collaboration, network, and global can be used to describe real-world relationships clearly and safely without referring to sensitive political issues.
Another important point is that Taiwan is constantly innovating and improving technology. Engineers, researchers, and companies in Taiwan work on new ideas every day, creating products and solutions that are used internationally. This ongoing development contributes to global progress and shows how specialized knowledge in one small region can have effects worldwide. For English learners, this explanation also teaches present simple and present continuous sentences naturally, such as Taiwan produces microchips every year, or engineers in Taiwan are developing new technologies, which are useful for speaking and writing about ongoing actions and facts.
In summary, Taiwan's importance in the global system comes from its role as a technology and innovation center, its integration into supply chains, and its participation in international cooperation. Although it is a small region, the expertise and products it produces affect industries and consumers worldwide. By focusing on these neutral and factual points, English learners can expand vocabulary, practice descriptive language, and connect ideas about technology, trade, and global cooperation in a clear and safe way.
Understanding Taiwan in this way helps learners see the practical meaning of global interdependence. Words like innovation, supply chain, partnership, and global impact become meaningful because they are linked to concrete examples that listeners can relate to. This section also reinforces the use of simple sentence structures for clarity and comprehension. By learning English through real-world examples like Taiwan's technological role, students gain knowledge about both language and the world, which strengthens listening, speaking, and thinking skills simultaneously.
When we consider why the world pays attention to regions like China and Taiwan, it is important to begin with the concept of global dependence on stability, which means that countries and economies around the world are connected in ways that allow goods, services, money, and information to move smoothly from one place to another. And when stability is maintained, businesses can plan production, people can find jobs, and families can have access to everyday products. But if stability is disrupted even in one small region, it can create ripple effects that influence markets, industries, and the availability of goods in countries far away, because modern trade and technology are interconnected on a global scale.
To explain this more clearly, think about the electronics you use every day, such as smartphones, computers, and televisions. Many of these devices include parts made in Taiwan, assembled in China, and sold in countries around the world. If there is a delay in production or shipment in one place, it can affect prices, availability, and the delivery time for these products in other countries. This demonstrates that events in one region are not isolated. They can influence transportation systems, manufacturing schedules, and even the cost of living for ordinary people, which is why international observers, businesses, and governments pay attention to global developments in a careful and measured way.
Global attention is also important in the context of markets and financial systems. Stock markets, trade exchanges, and investment flows are highly sensitive to events that occur in regions that are central to production and technology. For example, if a company that produces essential microchips in Taiwan faces a temporary closure, this can influence technology companies worldwide, affecting their ability to manufacture electronics or complete projects on time. Investors, business leaders, and policymakers watch these events closely because any disruption may create shifts in supply, pricing, or employment, and these shifts often have far-reaching consequences for consumers and workers in many different countries.
Another reason the world pays attention is transportation, which is a critical part of the global economy. Goods must move by ship, plane, or truck from factories to warehouses to stores, and delays in one region can create congestion and interruptions worldwide. For example, if a major port in Asia faces operational challenges, shipments to Europe or North America may be delayed, affecting industries that rely on timely delivery of parts or raw materials. For English learners, this example helps connect vocabulary like shipment, delivery, logistics, and transportation to real-world situations, while also providing practice with conditional sentences, such as, if shipments are delayed, production schedules may be affected, which is useful for both academic and professional English.
Jobs and employment are another reason why people around the world monitor developments in these regions. Many companies depend on suppliers and manufacturers in Asia, and when operations are smooth, workers have predictable schedules and stable incomes. However, if disruptions occur, such as production delays or changes in supply, companies may need to adjust work hours, postpone projects, or even reduce staff temporarily. This shows that global attention is not only about large companies or markets. It is also about people's daily lives, income, and opportunities. English learners can connect this explanation to vocabulary, like employment, schedule, income, and opportunity, which are common words in professional and everyday discussions.
Technology also plays a central role in why the world pays attention. Modern industries rely on electronic components, software, and machinery that are produced and transported internationally. A shortage of microchips, for example, can delay the production of cars, phones, medical equipment, and other devices that people rely on daily. These delays highlight how interconnected industries are, and they emphasize the importance of stability, cooperation, and planning across borders. For learners of English, hearing long sentences that describe cause and effect helps practice comprehension and improves understanding of words like shortage, component, industry, and rely, which are essential in discussions about technology and trade.
It is also important to consider social reasons. Events in one region can influence international policies, public opinion, and global collaboration. Countries and organizations watch developments carefully to ensure that cooperation continues and that supply chains remain reliable. For instance, educational institutions, research projects, and medical supply systems all depend on international coordination. If communication or cooperation is interrupted, it can affect research timelines, student exchanges, or the delivery of important resources. Using examples like these helps English learners understand that global attention is not only economic, but also social, and that words like cooperation, coordination, and resource are commonly used in academic and professional English.
Conditional sentences are especially helpful for learners in this context because they show relationships between events and consequences. For example, we can say, if transportation routes are delayed, prices may rise. Or, when factories operate efficiently, consumers receive products on time. These sentences illustrate how simple and complex ideas can be communicated clearly in English, while also teaching the learner to connect cause and effect. By listening carefully, learners can improve both their comprehension and their ability to speak or write about real-world events in a structured way.
Another way to think about global attention is through examples in everyday life. If a consumer wants to buy a new laptop, the price, availability, and delivery time may depend on production in distant countries. Similarly, if someone wants a car, it may include parts from multiple regions, and any interruption in one location can delay the final product. This demonstrates how global economics, technology, and transportation affect ordinary people, and why news about certain regions is monitored internationally. For learners, connecting these ideas to personal experiences helps make abstract concepts concrete and easier to understand.
Finally, understanding why the world pays attention encourages learners to see global topics from multiple perspectives. It is not about fear or conflict, but about recognizing interdependence, collaboration, and shared responsibility. When Adam and I explain these ideas using examples from technology, markets, transportation, and jobs, learners gain vocabulary, practice conditional sentences, and strengthen comprehension while connecting English to meaningful real-world situations. This approach supports thoughtful listening, careful understanding, and confident discussion about global topics, all while improving language skills in a safe and educational way.
In conclusion, the world pays attention to regions like China and Taiwan because of global dependence on stability, economic networks, technological production, transportation systems, employment, and social cooperation. Events in one region can affect markets, electronics, logistics, and jobs worldwide, and understanding these connections helps learners not only comprehend global affairs, but also expand English vocabulary and sentence structures. By focusing on factual, neutral explanations and using long, descriptive sentences, learners can improve listening comprehension, critical thinking, and language skills simultaneously, preparing them for real-world communication in professional, academic, and personal contexts.
Listening to this section carefully allows learners to notice cause and effect relationships, understand how global systems operate, and practice using conditional language like if, when, and because in meaningful sentences. By connecting abstract concepts to practical examples, learners strengthen both English comprehension and critical thinking. Understanding why the world pays attention in calm, factual terms helps students see that global issues are about connections, cooperation, and interdependence, not conflict. And this perspective supports a safe, educational, and motivating environment for language learning.
When we think about trade, technology, and daily life, it is helpful to start with items that most of us use every day, such as smartphones, computers, cars, and other technological devices. These objects may seem ordinary, but they are the result of a very large and complex system that involves multiple countries, companies, and processes. For example, the smartphone you are holding or using may include parts made in Taiwan, a screen produced in South Korea, software developed in the United States, and assembly completed in China before it reaches your home through international shipping networks. By looking at these examples, learners can understand that trade and technology are closely connected to daily life in ways that are practical, interesting, and relevant.
To make this simpler, imagine that each device is like a puzzle. Each part of the puzzle comes from a different country. Without one piece, the puzzle cannot be completed. This is how global trade works. Countries specialize in producing certain goods, and then they share these goods with other countries through trade. For English learners, this example helps connect words like specialize, product, trade, and deliver to real situations, making vocabulary more memorable and easier to understand, while also showing how sentences can describe a process step by step.
Global trade is not only about products, but also about timing, organization, and cooperation. Companies plan production schedules carefully, coordinate shipments, and ensure that materials reach the correct factories on time. For instance, car manufacturers may receive tires from one country, electronic systems from another, and engines from a third location. These components must arrive at the assembly plant in a specific order, otherwise the production process is delayed. By explaining trade in this way, we show that global connections are predictable, organized, and depend on collaboration rather than conflict, which is important for English learners to understand both the content and the vocabulary associated with logistics, production, and planning.
Another example is computers. A laptop might include a processor from Taiwan, memory from South Korea, a case from Vietnam, and software installed from a cloud system based in Europe or the United States. When all these parts come together in the correct sequence, the final product is ready to use. This step-by-step explanation helps learners notice words like processor, memory, cloud, and sequence, which are practical vocabulary terms for technology and trade discussions. Long sentences that describe these processes allow learners to practice comprehension, attention to detail, and the ability to follow logical sequences in English.
Transportation is another important part of daily life connected to trade and technology. Ships, planes, and trucks carry products from factories to warehouses, stores, and homes. A delay in transportation, such as a shipment arriving late at a port, can affect availability, prices, and even employment, because companies may need to adjust schedules or hire temporary workers to manage the change. Understanding this helps learners see that technology and trade are not abstract ideas. They are practical systems that influence real-world experiences, including jobs, shopping, and services that people rely on every day.
In addition, global trade affects jobs and opportunities in many countries. Factories, warehouses, shipping companies, and retail stores all depend on products that come from other countries. For example, an electronics store in Europe may hire workers to sell smartphones, but the products themselves depend on suppliers and manufacturers in Asia. This shows that daily life is connected to trade networks, and learners can use words like hire, supplier, warehouse, and network to describe these connections, practicing practical vocabulary that is useful in everyday conversation and professional English contexts.
Technology also connects people through communication and information systems. The software used in smartphones, computers, and cars often depends on global cooperation. Developers from different countries work together to create applications, update systems, and ensure compatibility across devices. This kind of collaboration demonstrates how international trade is not only about physical goods, but also about knowledge, innovation, and problem-solving. For learners, understanding these connections provides context for vocabulary like collaboration, innovation, compatibility, and update, which are commonly used in professional, academic, and technical English.
It is helpful to organize explanations in a sequence so that learners can follow the process from start to finish. First, parts are produced in specialized countries. Second, they are shipped to assembly plants. Third, the final product is tested, packaged, and delivered. Finally, the product reaches the consumer, ready for use. By describing trade in these steps, English learners can practice sequencing words like first, second, then, finally, and connect these words to real-life examples. This method improves comprehension, speaking skills, and the ability to explain processes clearly in English.
Global trade and technology also demonstrate cause and effect relationships in everyday life. If there is a delay in one country, it may cause price increases in another, affect the availability of products, or even influence which jobs are in demand. Conversely, when trade and technology systems operate smoothly, consumers benefit from timely delivery, affordable prices, and high-quality products. By discussing cause and effect in long sentences, learners practice using connecting words such as if, because, so that, and therefore, which are essential for clear and professional English communication.
Finally, understanding trade and technology helps learners connect global events to their own daily experience. By noticing how smartphones, computers, and cars arrive through international collaboration, listeners can better understand vocabulary, practice descriptive language, and relate abstract concepts to familiar objects. Learning English in this way, through practical, real-world examples, strengthens listening comprehension, speaking ability, and confidence in discussing global topics. It shows that trade and technology are not distant ideas. They influence daily life in tangible ways, providing both context and meaningful content for language learning.
In conclusion, global trade and technology connect directly to daily life through products, transportation, jobs, and communication. By looking at examples like smartphones, computers, and cars, learners understand how trade networks function, how collaboration across countries is essential, and how delays or disruptions can influence real-world experiences. Using long sentences, sequencing words, and practical vocabulary, English learners can practice listening, comprehension, and speaking while also gaining knowledge about the modern world in a calm, neutral, and educational way.
By following this explanation, learners can see that trade and technology are part of everyday life and not abstract or distant topics. Words like shipment, supplier, assembly, network, and collaboration become meaningful because they relate to objects and experiences the listener encounters daily. This section reinforces vocabulary, process explanation, and real-world context, allowing learners to practice both comprehension and language use, preparing them to discuss global topics in English confidently while connecting learning to practical experiences in everyday life.
When we discuss international cooperation and diplomacy, it is helpful to start by defining diplomacy in a clear and simple way. Diplomacy refers to the methods and processes through which countries communicate, negotiate, and cooperate with each other in order to solve problems, manage trade agreements, and work together on global issues without conflict. Diplomacy is not about force or threats. It is about using discussion, understanding, and agreement to create solutions that benefit multiple parties. For English learners, this provides an opportunity to practice formal verbs such as discuss, cooperate, and manage, while learning to express ideas politely and clearly.
To make this easier to understand, think of diplomacy as a careful conversation between countries, much like a group of students working together on a project. Each country has its own interests and priorities, and through discussion and negotiation, they aim to reach agreements that satisfy everyone involved. For instance, trade deals, environmental agreements, and technology partnerships are all examples of diplomacy in action. English learners can also notice how polite and neutral expressions, such as "it is important to consider," "countries agree to," and "discussions are held," are used in formal contexts to maintain respect and clarity.
Countries engage in diplomacy through meetings, conferences, letters, and international organizations. For example, representatives may meet to discuss trade regulations, environmental policies, or technology collaboration. These meetings are carefully organized, and each participant expresses their position clearly while listening to the perspectives of others. By observing this process, learners can see how verbs like negotiate, coordinate, and collaborate are applied in real-world contexts, and how formal sentence structures and polite phrasing are essential for professional and academic English, especially when describing international events or agreements.
Another important aspect is cooperation, which is closely linked to diplomacy. Cooperation involves countries working together to achieve shared goals, such as developing renewable energy, improving public health, or advancing scientific research. These activities are often managed by international organizations, which provide a platform for communication and coordination. For learners, understanding the difference between cooperation and conflict helps reinforce neutral vocabulary and descriptive language, while sentences like "countries cooperate to address global challenges" provide a clear model of formal English in context.
International organizations such as the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the World Health Organization play a key role in facilitating diplomacy. They organize meetings, help countries discuss problems, and provide guidelines for agreements. By participating in these organizations, countries can manage relationships in a structured and neutral way, ensuring that cooperation is maintained and potential misunderstandings are minimized. This allows learners to practice the passive voice, which is often used in academic English, such as in sentences like, "agreements are negotiated by representatives," or "policies are discussed at international meetings," which highlight the action without focusing on the doer.
It is also important to understand that diplomacy is an ongoing process rather than a single event. Negotiations, discussions, and agreements often take months or even years to complete, because countries need to consider different perspectives, priorities, and potential outcomes. For English learners, long explanatory sentences that show sequence, cause, and effect are useful for comprehension and practice. Words like process, perspective, priority, and outcome are frequently used in academic and professional contexts, and understanding their meaning helps learners describe complex topics clearly and accurately.
In addition to formal meetings, diplomacy includes written communication, such as official letters, reports, and statements. These documents are often carefully reviewed to ensure that language is neutral, polite, and precise. Phrases like, "it is recommended that," "countries are encouraged to," and "cooperation is promoted" are common in diplomatic English and provide learners with models of polite academic expression. Using these phrases helps learners expand vocabulary and understand the tone required for professional communication about international affairs.
Another way to see diplomacy in action is through global projects. Countries may collaborate to build infrastructure, conduct research, or provide humanitarian assistance. In these projects, roles are divided, responsibilities are shared, and outcomes are measured carefully. For example, one country may provide technology, another may provide funding, and a third may offer human resources or expertise. Listening to these examples allows learners to connect vocabulary with real-world applications, practice sequencing explanations, and understand how formal verbs like manage, coordinate, and implement are used in neutral educational contexts.
It is also useful to consider that diplomacy often involves compromise. Countries may not get everything they want, but through negotiation and cooperation, they can reach solutions that benefit multiple parties. Learning how to describe compromise and negotiation in English helps learners express complex ideas clearly, using phrases like, "It was agreed that," "both sides considered," and "a solution was reached," which are common in professional, academic, and news-related English. This approach strengthens both language skills and global awareness simultaneously.
Finally, understanding international cooperation and diplomacy helps learners develop critical thinking and language skills together. By hearing how Adam explains the processes and how I simplify the ideas for clarity, listeners can practice formal vocabulary, passive voice structures, polite academic expressions, and clear explanation sequencing. This section reinforces that global issues can be understood in neutral educational terms, and that learners can discuss these topics confidently without political bias, while improving listening comprehension, vocabulary, and English fluency for professional and academic contexts.
In conclusion, diplomacy and international cooperation involve communication, negotiation, and structured collaboration between countries. Through meetings, written communication, and participation in international organizations, countries work together to solve problems, manage projects, and achieve shared goals. For English learners, understanding these processes introduces formal verbs, polite expressions, and passive voice structures, while providing clear, neutral, and educational examples that show how diplomacy is essential for global stability, problem-solving, and professional communication.
By listening carefully to this explanation, learners can practice long sentences, descriptive language, and formal vocabulary, while understanding the processes that allow countries to collaborate peacefully. Words like negotiate, cooperate, coordinate, manage, and implement become meaningful through examples, and the use of polite, neutral expressions helps learners develop academic and professional English skills. Diplomacy is not distant or abstract. It is a structured and educational system that can be described clearly, learned safely, and discussed confidently, which makes this topic both informative and practical for learners worldwide.
When we discuss media, information, and understanding the world, it is important to recognize that international news is reported through various channels, such as television, newspapers, online platforms, and social media. Each channel can present the same event in slightly different ways, depending on the source, purpose, or perspective. For English learners, this is a useful opportunity to learn reporting verbs such as report, state, announce, and explain, because these words are frequently used in news articles, academic texts, and professional discussions to describe what someone communicates or shares, while remaining neutral and factual.
To make this easier to understand, think of international news as a story told from different viewpoints. For example, an economic development in one country might be reported by local media with a focus on domestic benefits, while foreign media may highlight international impact. By comparing these perspectives, learners can notice the difference between opinions and facts, which is an important skill for critical thinking in English. Sentences like, "The report states that production has increased," or "experts suggest that this change may affect markets," show the difference between reporting facts and expressing opinions, which is essential for safe and neutral language learning.
Responsible media reporting means presenting information in a balanced and accurate way. Journalists aim to provide facts, data, and verified statements from credible sources while avoiding exaggeration or speculation. For example, when reporting trade developments between countries, media may include numbers, dates, and statements from officials, which allows readers and listeners to form their own understanding based on evidence rather than personal bias. For English learners, hearing phrases such as, "It is reported that," "officials announced," or "data shows" helps practice formal, neutral expressions that are widely used in educational, professional, and news contexts.
Careful listening and reading are essential skills when engaging with media. Not every article, video, or post is written in the same way, and it is important to distinguish between fact and opinion. For example, a sentence like, "Experts believe that the technology will improve global trade," expresses an opinion or prediction, while "exports increased by 5% last year" presents a fact. English learners can practice these distinctions to understand the meaning and tone of texts, while also improving comprehension and vocabulary through context, which is very useful for both academic studies and everyday understanding of news.
Another important skill is recognizing the purpose of a media source. Some media focus on delivering educational content, some on entertainment, and others on persuasion or commentary. By identifying the purpose, learners can better interpret the information and decide how to use it. For instance, a news article that reports the current economic situation provides factual details, while an article that argues for a specific policy expresses opinion. Understanding these differences helps learners safely navigate global information, practice reporting verbs, and develop the ability to discuss world events in a neutral, respectful way.
It is also helpful to consider that global events often affect multiple countries, industries, and communities, and media reporting can highlight different aspects depending on perspective. For example, a technological innovation in Taiwan may be reported internationally as an economic achievement, while locally it may be emphasized as a source of national pride or regional development. By noticing these differences, learners can improve vocabulary related to reporting, such as highlight, emphasize, focus on, and cover, while also practicing longer sentences that describe multiple perspectives, which is a common structure in formal English writing and speaking.
Critical thinking is another key aspect when engaging with news. Learners are encouraged to ask questions such as, "Who is providing this information? What evidence supports this statement? And are multiple viewpoints presented?" These questions help learners analyze content carefully and understand that media is a tool for learning and discussion, not only for entertainment or immediate reaction. For English learners, forming sentences like, "The article suggests that," or "It is reported that," allows them to practice expressing ideas clearly and neutrally, while maintaining a safe and educational tone.
Careful comparison of different sources also helps learners understand context and nuance. For example, one report may say, "Exports increased due to new partnerships," while another report may note, "Growth is slower than expected." Both statements can be true, and learners can see how language is used to present data, opinion, or interpretation. This practice builds vocabulary for expressing balance, caution, and neutrality, using phrases such as, "According to experts," "data indicates," or "it is suggested that," which are common in professional, academic, and news-related English.
Media literacy also includes recognizing bias, framing, and emphasis. Even neutral reporting can highlight certain aspects of a story more than others, such as economic impact versus social effect. By learning to notice these subtleties, learners improve comprehension and develop critical thinking in English. For example, sentences like, "The study emphasizes the importance of cooperation," versus "The report highlights economic concerns," show how different verbs guide understanding, and learners can practice using them to describe content accurately and neutrally.
Finally, understanding media, information, and world events together allows learners to improve both language and global knowledge. By listening to Adam explain the concepts and my simplifications for clarity, learners can practice reporting verbs recognize opinion versus fact, and strengthen comprehension skills. This section demonstrates how English can be learned safely and effectively while exploring global news and events in an educational, calm, and neutral way, encouraging learners to discuss the world with vocabulary, structure, and confidence.
In conclusion, responsible engagement with international news helps learners develop critical thinking, analytical skills, and vocabulary. By understanding how information is reported, recognizing multiple perspectives, and distinguishing fact from opinion, listeners can navigate global news safely while improving English comprehension. Reporting verbs, neutral expressions, and careful phrasing allow learners to describe events accurately, practice longer sentences, and participate in discussions about the world without bias or conflict.
By following this section, learners can practice reading and listening carefully, notice the differences between opinion and fact, and use neutral educational language to express ideas. Words like report, suggest, state, highlight, and emphasize become meaningful because they are linked to real examples of media. This approach strengthens language skills, global awareness, and critical thinking, preparing learners to understand international events confidently, safely, and effectively in English.
When we consider what global events and international developments mean for students and workers, it is important to understand that the world is increasingly connected, and skills that are useful in one country are often valuable in many others. Students who are learning English today will be better prepared for future opportunities because English is a global language of communication, business, and education. By studying English, students can participate in international programs, collaborate with peers worldwide, and access knowledge and resources that are not available in their local environment, which will help them in both academic and professional settings.
To explain this more simply, learning English today will allow students to communicate with people from other countries, read important information, and take part in courses or programs online or in person abroad. English opens doors to international careers and education because it is widely used in science, technology, business, and global communication. For English learners, practicing phrases like, "I will be able to study abroad," or "I will use English in my future job," helps connect future tense with real-life opportunities, making the language both practical and motivating.
Adaptability is another key skill for students and workers in a global environment. This means being ready to adjust to new tools, technologies, cultures, and ways of working. For example, someone who learns to use communication platforms, online collaboration tools, and international research methods will be prepared to work in different countries or with colleagues from various cultural backgrounds. English is central to this adaptability because it allows people to understand instructions, communicate clearly, and participate confidently in diverse environments. For learners, sentences such as, "I will adapt to new technologies," or "I will learn to work with people from other countries," combine future tense with practical vocabulary for careers and education.
Global careers also often require problem-solving, critical thinking, and effective communication. Students who develop these skills in English will have more opportunities to work internationally or in multinational companies. By understanding how global events influence industries, markets, and technology, learners can prepare themselves for the types of tasks they may encounter in the future. Using future tense structures like, "I will participate in international projects," or "I will apply my skills to global challenges," helps learners practice expressing goals and ambitions while connecting English to real-world careers.
It is also important to notice that education and career paths are changing quickly. Jobs that exist today may evolve or be replaced by new technologies in the future. Students who learn English, technology skills, and global awareness will be better prepared to navigate these changes. Employers will value workers who can communicate effectively across borders adapt to new systems, and solve problems in international teams. English learners can practice sentences like, I will use my skills in future projects, or I will continue learning new tools to stay competitive, which are practical for discussing career planning and lifelong learning.
Language learning is directly connected to opportunity. Students and workers who practice English now will be able to read international research, attend webinars, participate in online courses, and even connect with mentors from other countries. These experiences expand knowledge, improve skills, and create networks that can influence future success. For learners, sentences like, I will attend online courses in English, or I will communicate with experts worldwide, reinforce future tense, practical vocabulary, and realistic motivation for personal and professional growth.
Students and workers will also benefit from understanding international cooperation and global developments. Knowing how countries interact, how trade works, and how technology affects daily life prepares learners to make informed decisions and solve problems in future careers. English is a tool to access this knowledge, as most international reports, research papers, and professional communications are in English. Learners can practice expressions like, I will understand global trends, or I will use English to read reports to connect language learning with global awareness and practical outcomes.
Motivation is important, but it should be realistic. Students and workers may not immediately reach fluency or international jobs, but every step in learning English and understanding global topics adds value. Small improvements, daily practice, and curiosity will accumulate into real skills over time. Sentences such as, I will continue improving my English every day, or I will apply what I learn in my future work, help learners express commitment, plan for the future, and use English in a meaningful, practical way while remaining positive and realistic.
In addition, learners who understand global connections will be more confident in international environments. They will know how events in one part of the world can influence work, education, and technology everywhere. By connecting global knowledge with English language skills, learners can participate in discussions, write reports, and communicate ideas clearly and confidently. Phrases like, I will discuss international projects with colleagues, or I will share knowledge with peers globally, allow learners to practice career-focused vocabulary and future tense in meaningful contexts.
Finally, understanding the global environment and learning English equips students and workers for lifelong learning. They will be able to continue adapting, solving problems, and taking advantage of new opportunities throughout their careers. By linking language practice to real-world goals, learners gain both confidence and skills. Sentences like, I will continue learning to improve my career, or I will explore international opportunities using English, reinforce future tense, career-related vocabulary, and a motivational but realistic mindset, helping learners connect education and work with meaningful action.
In conclusion, global knowledge, English language skills, and adaptability will shape the future for students and workers. By learning English, understanding international trends, and practicing problem-solving, learners will prepare themselves for international education, global careers, and real-world opportunities. Using future tense, career vocabulary, and motivational but realistic language allows learners to express goals, plan for success, and connect their English learning to meaningful outcomes.
By following this section carefully, learners can see how their efforts today will influence tomorrow. English is not just a language. It is a tool to access knowledge, communicate globally, and build opportunities in education and work. Using phrases like, I will participate, I will improve, and I will connect reinforces future tense, career vocabulary, and practical motivation, allowing students and workers to feel prepared, confident, and inspired while learning English and planning for their global future.
When we consider English learning through global topics, It is important to understand that listening to news, podcasts, or discussions about international events is not only about gaining information, but also about improving language skills. By paying attention to vocabulary, sentence structure, and the way ideas are connected, learners can strengthen comprehension and communication simultaneously. For example, when you listen to global topics about trade, technology, or cooperation, you are practicing English in a meaningful context, which is more effective than memorizing isolated words, because the brain connects language to real-world knowledge.
To simplify this, think of global topics as tools for learning English. Each time you hear a word, phrase, or sentence in context, you understand not just the meaning, but also how it is used. For example, when a news report states, countries cooperate to develop new technologies, learners see vocabulary like cooperate, develop, and technology in a sentence, and can later use it in their own writing or speaking. This approach is helpful because it combines listening, comprehension, and vocabulary learning, while allowing students to notice grammar structures, sentence patterns, and ways to paraphrase ideas for clear communication.
Listening actively to global topics also helps learners develop strategies to manage unfamiliar words and concepts. For instance, when you encounter a term you do not know, you can try to understand it from context, repeat the sentence, or note it for later study. These strategies encourage metacognitive awareness, meaning learners think about their thinking and their learning process. By observing how speakers introduce, explain, and connect ideas, learners practice predicting meaning, identifying key points, and noticing transitions, all of which are crucial for comprehension in English and for academic or professional discussions.
Paraphrasing is another useful technique. This means explaining what someone else said in your own words. For example, if a speaker says, "International cooperation is essential for managing global trade," a learner could rephrase it as, "Working together across countries is important to handle trade around the world." Paraphrasing helps learners practice vocabulary, sentence structure, and clarity while reinforcing understanding. It also teaches how to summarize information, a skill that is widely used in academic tasks, professional writing, and daily communication in English.
Global topics also expose learners to formal and neutral language, which is common in news, academic discussions, and professional settings. Hearing phrases like, "It is reported that," "experts suggest that," or "data indicates," allows learners to adopt similar expressions in their own speech and writing. These phrases are often repeated in various contexts, which strengthens memory and understanding. In addition, learners notice how connecting words like because, therefore, however, and in addition are used to link ideas, helping them produce more complex and coherent sentences in English.
Vocabulary growth is another benefit of engaging with global topics. Words related to technology, trade, diplomacy, and culture are learned in context, which is more effective than isolated memorization. For example, hearing export, import, cooperate, negotiation, or stability repeatedly in meaningful sentences helps learners understand not only the definition, but also how to use the word in conversation or writing. English learners can also practice combining these words into their own sentences, creating new contexts, and noticing subtle differences between synonyms or related terms.
Listening to podcasts or global discussions also supports comprehension of longer sentences and complex ideas. Learners encounter sentences that explain cause and effect, compare options, or describe sequences of events, which mirrors the way professional and academic English is often structured. By focusing on how ideas are presented, learners can notice patterns such as if, then statements, contrasts with however or although, and sequences with first, second, finally. Practicing comprehension in this way improves both listening skills and the ability to produce similar sentences when speaking or writing.
It is also useful for learners to practice summarizing information. After listening to a segment, they can try to state the main idea in 1 or 2 sentences. For example, if a podcast section explains how Taiwan contributes to global technology, learners could say, Taiwan produces important technology components that help businesses worldwide. Summarizing encourages active engagement, reinforces vocabulary, and allows learners to express ideas clearly and confidently, which is essential for both comprehension and communication in English.
Another strategy is to notice how speakers emphasize certain points or repeat important ideas. This helps learners identify key information and understand which concepts are most relevant. For instance, when a speaker repeats that cooperation between countries is essential, learners know this is an important concept to remember. They can also practice using the same emphasis in their own sentences, learning to highlight important ideas, which is valuable in presentations, essays, and conversations in English.
Finally, using global topics for English learning encourages reflection and metacognition. Learners can ask themselves questions like, what did I understand? Which words were new? And how can I use this information in my own sentences? These questions guide learners to think about their learning process and strategies, which improves retention and comprehension. By combining listening, vocabulary practice, paraphrasing, summarizing, and reflection, learners develop a comprehensive approach to English that is practical, educational, and motivating.
In conclusion, global topics are not just sources of information. They are tools for improving English comprehension, vocabulary, and communication skills. By listening carefully, practicing paraphrasing, summarizing, and reflecting on new words and structures, learners strengthen both language ability and critical thinking. Using formal expressions, reporting verbs, and neutral language prepares students for academic, professional, and daily communication while connecting learning to meaningful content in the real world.
By following this approach, learners can make global topics a central part of their English practice. Sentences like, I will summarize what I learned, or I will explain this idea in my own words, allow students to connect learning strategies with language use. This section reinforces vocabulary, long sentences, paraphrasing, and metacognitive awareness, helping learners improve comprehension, communication, and confidence in English, while exploring real-world knowledge in a calm, neutral, and educational way.
As we reach the end of today's podcast, it is helpful to take a moment to reflect on what we have learned and review some key vocabulary that appeared throughout our discussion. Words like cooperate, trade, technology, international, perspective, report, summarize, and adaptability were used in various sentences to describe global processes, English learning strategies, and practical examples. For learners, reviewing these words in context is important because it allows you to connect meaning, pronunciation, and usage, which strengthens memory and improves your ability to apply these words in your own speaking and writing.
To make this more practical, try thinking about each word and forming your own sentence. For example, you could say, countries cooperate to manage trade, or I will adapt to new technology in my studies. Reflecting on vocabulary in this way helps learners practice both comprehension and production of English. It also encourages active thinking, because learners are not only repeating words, but also using them in meaningful sentences. This step connects listening and understanding with speaking and writing, which is essential for effective language learning.
Reflection questions are another useful tool. Listeners can ask themselves, which new word did I learn today? Can I explain the idea of cooperation in my own words? Or how can I use this information in my daily life or studies? These questions help learners practice forming sentences, thinking critically about the content, and connecting new information to existing knowledge. Using questions in English also reinforces grammar, sentence structure, and vocabulary, while encouraging learners to be active participants in their learning rather than passive listeners.
Another way to practice is by summarizing sections of the podcast. For example, you could say, I learned that global trade connects technology, countries, and daily life. Or, diplomacy helps countries work together peacefully. Summarizing helps learners organize their thoughts, identify key ideas, and express them clearly in English. This technique improves both comprehension and speaking ability, while giving learners confidence in their ability to explain complex topics in simple, clear language.
It is also helpful to think about the questions in a reflective way, such as, what part of today's podcast was most interesting? Or, which skill do I want to practice first? These questions encourage learners to connect global knowledge with personal experience, which makes learning more engaging and meaningful. Reflective thinking supports deeper understanding and helps learners notice patterns in vocabulary, grammar, and sentence structure, which reinforces long-term retention of English skills.
We can also review how language was used to describe processes, explain ideas, and connect concepts. For example, phrases like, countries cooperate to develop new technologies, exports increase due to trade, or I will use English to participate in global opportunities, combine vocabulary, sequence, and future tense. Learners can practice these sentences aloud, notice word order, and try to create similar sentences about their own experiences. This strengthens both listening comprehension and speaking fluency in English.
Another useful exercise is to form your own questions based on today's podcast. For instance, you could ask, how can I adapt to new technologies in the future? Or, what vocabulary from this podcast can I use tomorrow? Creating questions helps learners practice sentence formation, question words such as how, what, and why, and reflective thinking in English. These skills are essential for classroom discussion, independent study, and daily conversations, while reinforcing vocabulary and sentence structure naturally.
Finally, it is important to remember that learning English is a gradual process, and reflection helps learners see progress over time. By reviewing vocabulary, forming questions, summarizing content, and reflecting on personal understanding, learners strengthen both comprehension and communication skills. It also builds confidence, because learners can recognize what they know and identify areas for further practice. Phrases such as, I understand this topic, or I will practice these words every day, encourage steady improvement without pressure, keeping learning calm and enjoyable.
In conclusion, reflecting on today's podcast and reviewing vocabulary, forming questions, and summarizing key ideas are excellent strategies for learners to improve English while engaging with global topics. Taking the time to think about what you have learned, practicing your sentences, and applying new words in daily life strengthens listening, comprehension, and speaking skills. Reflection also encourages metacognitive thinking, which helps learners understand how they learn best and apply strategies effectively for continued improvement.
Remember, English learning is not just about memorizing words. It is about understanding, practicing, and connecting ideas. Using reflection, summarization, and question formation allows learners to actively engage with content, improve vocabulary, and strengthen communication skills. Keep practicing, notice your progress, and use what you have learned in your own sentences. By doing this every day, English learning becomes a calm, educational, and meaningful part of your life, preparing you for success in studies, work, and international communication.